Welcome to Tardisian Files, a show dedicated to reviewing and discussing aspects of one of the most loved and longest-running British sci-fi shows. This podcast is a non-profit, fan-led series where we pull together sources from all across Doctor Who's extended media, including the show itself, comics, audio stories, and novels. We pick up where we left off, with the Doctor arriving back on Earth, having just received Rose's transmission. He's just left the former orbit of the planet Midnight, which he has taken out of time using a time lock field, using an old capability of the TARDIS from the Time War, to prevent further incidents like the massacre of the Leisure Palace. See our last episode. Upon seeing that everything is fine, the Doctor returns to the TARDIS to try and trace Rose's message, to see if there was anything that might indicate what she was trying to warn him of, knowing that it must be something severe if she's able to contact him from another universe. Suddenly, the TARDIS shakes violently, throwing the Doctor round the console room. When it stops, he races back to the door and nearly falls into the vacuum of space before stopping himself. The Doctor is shocked. The TARDIS hasn't moved. The Earth has. It is gone. The entire planet has disappeared. Far across the universe, in New York City, Martha Jones gets up from the floor of her unit office, waking up to a scene of chaos. She immediately starts coordinating her colleagues, telling them to get the power back on and find out what just happened. At that moment, Martha's colleague tells her to look at the sky, insisting that they all just look. Across the world in Cardiff, Jack Harkness, Gwen Cooper and Yanto Jones stand up, the hub having just been shaken by an enormous earthquake. Thinking it was the rift, Jack leaves to look outside. Yanto and Gwen check the quake's radius, and they look in shock. South Wales wasn't the only affected area. In Ealing, Sarah Jane and Luke stand up, having been thrown off their feet in the attic of Bannerman Road. They look up and see the sky has gone dark, at 8 AM in the morning. Sarah Jane wakes up Mr. Smith, who tells them both to look outside, stating that doing so would tell them quite conclusively what happened. They take his advice and go downstairs. Finally, Rose Tyler touches down in end space and looks to the sky. It's filled with 26 planets. The battle is about to begin. So the first question we need to ask in this what-if scenario is, where does Rose actually land when she arrives in end space? In the original timeline, Rose landed in London because she needed to make contact with Donna's family in hopes that they would be able to contact Donna and the Doctor. With Donna out of the picture, there's still two people who she could go to for help in end space: Sarah Jane Smith and Captain Jack Harkness. So who's she going to go to? In my opinion, Rose would more likely seek out Jack for a number of reasons. For one thing, she knows Jack better than Sarah Jane, making him the more likely contact. Additionally, we know from the Torchwood audio story Poker Face that there is an alternate version of Jack working for Torchwood 1 in Pete's world, the same place where Rose and Pete worked before it was merged into UNIT on their Earth by President Harriet Jones. Given her proximity to this alternate version of Jack, and the Dimensions canon's ability to read the timelines, it's likely that Rose would have been able to figure out that her version of Jack also worked Torchwood in Endspace. In contrast, Rose didn't know Sarah Jane well, and if a version of her existed in Pete's world, this alternate Sarah Jane would have had a very different life path to the one that Rose knew. If anything, the closest this alternate Sarah Jane would be to the version in Endspace would be becoming a famous journalist, potentially even rising to take over handling the world's media after the fall of Cybers Industries, and this will likely be due to the absence of the Doctor in this universe, causing Sarah Jane to be more career-driven. So, Rose lands in Cardiff and starts making her way towards Kirby Plaza. Torchwood 3 will later be alerted to her presence due to the dimensional shift that brought her to Earth, setting off their rift-manipulated alarms. Meanwhile, across the other end of space, the Doctor has gone to the Shadow Proclamation for help, like he did in the original timeline. He arrives, the Shadow Architect informs him that while the Earth is indeed missing, 24 worlds have all also been stolen at the same moment without a trace. The Doctor gets to work, seeing the reports of all the missing planets, but does he remember what he was told by various people in his travels about planets going missing from different epochs in time as well as in space? Well, yes, but not as quickly as he did in the original timeline without Donna there to point it out. This is because while he knew that Pyrovilia, Adipose 3, and the lost moon of Poosh had vanished mysteriously in the past, he would have likely been more focused on the immediate problem before linking it to the cold cases kept in the Shadow Proclamation's database. Back on Earth, Torchwood 3, Unit and Sarah Jane are all scanning the new artificial planetary system that the Earth has been moved to. They all detect the same thing: 27 planets, including the Earth, plus an artificial space station sitting at the heart of it all. And most importantly, movement. There are hundreds, if not thousands of Earthbound ships swiftly closing the distance between the space station and the Earth. Mr. Smith detects a transmission from the incoming ships, and Sarah Jane instructs him to put it through on all communication channels. She is terrified by what she hears. Exterminate. At Torchwood, Jack's horror is replaced by a small ray of hope in the form of a blonde woman standing at the water tower above the hub. Gwen is the first to notice her, and when Jack sees, he's gobsmacked. It's Rose Tyler. In New York, Martha has been ordered to evacuate, following her commanding officer while still on the phone to Jack. She's been instructed to leave New York and find the Doctor using Project Indigo to return to Unit HQ at the Tower of London. Jack, however, warns her that this project is not safe to use. Martha ultimately caves to her commanding officer's commands, and he gives her one final instruction. He authorises her to take the Osterhagen key. Now chilled to the bone, and running out of time as the Daleks can be heard down the corridor from where they're all standing, Martha uses the teleport. Horrified and distraught, Jack explains to the Torchwood team and Rose that Project Indigo was an experimental teleport reverse-engineered from Sontaran technologies after the Atmos battle. But without proper coordinates and stabilisation, Martha is now officially nowhere, scattered into atoms, and to the best of their knowledge, effectively dead. Back at the Shadow Proclamation, the Doctor has finally asked to review the cold cases, now remembering the 3 planets that were named by various people throughout his travels: Pyrovilia, Adipose 3, and the lost moon of Poosh. He adds them to the list of missing planets and puts the computer into 3D. Automatically, the projected planets realign themselves, fitting together like parts of an engine. He then also remembers that an old foe of his tried to move the Earth before, a long time ago. Back in the Medusa Cascade, on board the Dalek's Crucible, the Supreme Dalek is conversing with Davros. They're discussing the prophecies of the mad Dalek Khan. The Doctor is coming. Khan has foretold a dark shadow descending over the Doctor, and a universe that has grown cold and metallic. He has also foretold the end of the Daleks, once and for all. The Supreme Dalek dismisses Khan as insane, but Davros remains uneasy. Meanwhile, the Doctor is still at the Shadow Proclamation. Without Donna in this timeline, he has no way of knowing that the alien migrant bees have left Earth, and so he cannot use the Tadoka scale to trace the Earth. However, at this point, he already suspects the Daleks, and he knows that the only way the Daleks could have returned is if there were more survivors from the Time War who escaped the time lock. He already knows that the cult of Skaro and their army sealed in the Genesis Ark survived, as did the Metatron Dalek. so he knows it is possible to escape from the time lock surrounding the Time War. But who can he turn to see if the time lock was breached again? In my opinion, the next place he would go to is the Time Agency in the 62nd century, when it is under Helen Barnes's leadership, for two reasons. One, he may be able to use their technology to trace Jack's vortex manipulator, or Jack himself, as Jack is a fixed point in time in human form. And two, the Time Agency in the 62nd century had developed the hourglass, which was heavily based on the moment, so the Doctor knows he can use it to search the timeline for the Earth. See episode 10 of this series for more information on the Time Agency. Another question is, does the Doctor align himself with the Shadow Proclamation in this timeline? This is the Doctor, now twisted by loss, with no one to anchor him, and in the time since he stopped the adipose, he's watched Unit be slaughtered, blown the Sontaran fleet up without warning, and just time-locked the planet Midnight to prevent any other Midnight entities from attacking any other species that may have otherwise ventured out onto the planet's surface. In short, he's done playing around, especially if it's the Daleks. He turns to the Shadow Architect, telling her he intends to go to the Time Agency for their help. Just like in the original timeline, the Shadow Architect demands that he hands over the TARDIS to her, but instead of running away, he tells her to come with him, saying that where he's going, they will have access to an entire fleet of time ships led by an equally trigger-happy director. Liking the sound of this, the Shadow Architect agrees, and they plot a course for the Time Agency in the future. Meanwhile, back in the Medusa Cascade, Rose is telling Torchwood 3 about what she saw in her travels across the multiverse. All the stars were going out because of the absence of the Doctor in each reality that she visited. They begin to wonder if there's any way to contact the Doctor, knowing that he'd likely be looking for them since he would have noticed the planet Earth missing by now. Yanto points out that if they begin broadcasting on any kind of signal using the rift, the Daleks would hear them and trace it back to them. Gwen then suggests that instead of waiting around for the Doctor, they try and get as many people off Earth as they can, suggesting that they try and combine Rose's dimensional cannon technology with the rift and take everyone to Pete's world. Jack refuses, knowing that trying to transport large volumes of people could lead to them becoming lost anywhere in time and space, and possibly dead. They're interrupted by a signal that breaches the hub's security. A woman's voice telling them that abandoning Earth is not an option. They all look in surprise to see who is on their screens. It's Harriet Jones, former Prime Minister. Harriet connects Torchwood 3 to 13 Bannerman Road and the Joneses' residence, revealing to them all that Martha is still alive, having teleported back to her mother. Additionally, through the introductions, Martha and Rose meet earlier in this timeline. After a brief conversation about the Osterhagen key, Harriet forcibly moves the conversation to focus on her plan, the subwave network. If they all pool their resources together, they can boost the signal they're communicating on and reach the Doctor by calling Martha's superphone on board the TARDIS. Recognising that this will make Harriet visible to the Daleks, they all agree and set to work. Meanwhile, now in the 62nd century, the Doctor and the Shadow Architect arrive at the Time Agency, where they're greeted by its director, Helen Barnes. She tells the Doctor that the hourglass predicted a 50% chance he'd come to her for help. However, it hadn't predicted him bringing the Shadow Architect along with him. Helen begins to tease the Doctor, wondering if he's falling into old habits. Not seeing the humour, the Doctor stoically informs her that her own past is at stake. Helen is easily convinced to help by the prospect of her ancestors dying if Earth is not recovered back in 2009, and her entire existence being erased, thus her rise to power being erased along with it. Offended but now motivated, Helen takes them to the command centre of the Hourglass. The Doctor tells her to scan the temporal infrastructure of the time lock surrounding the Time War, looking for any weak points or breaches. Helen protests at first, believing that such a thing is impossible, but relents, finding that there is indeed a breach in the time lock, specifically at the point surrounding the battle at the gates of Elysium, and that the time lock was broken into, not out of. The Doctor is now thoroughly confused, wondering what it could be that the perpetrator could have taken from the battle and how it links to the missing planets. Finally, the Doctor asks Helen to trace Jack's vortex manipulator. She does so, however, she's unable to lock onto it, as for some reason it appears to be temporarily out of sync with the time zone it's supposedly in. At this moment, Torchwood's rift manipulator, combined with Mr. Smith's use of the global cell network, boosts the subwave signal, sending it across time and space. The Doctor, Helen, and the Shadow Architect turn towards the TARDIS, where the unmistakable sound of a mobile phone can be heard. The Doctor races into the TARDIS, followed by Helen and the Shadow Architect, and when they realise that it's not a call, but a signal being sent to the Doctor relays the signal to the Time Agency's mainframe and the Shadow Architect's galactic beacon. He turns to them both and tells them that they need to get back to their respective agencies and trace the signal. They'll know where to find him when they do. They agree, and the Doctor leaves them both behind, the TARDIS now in hot pursuit of the signal. On board the Crucible, the Daleks have detected and traced the subwave network back to Harriet Jones. Daleks are dispatched to her home, and they exterminate her in front of the other companions, but not before she transfers the subwave to Torchwood 3. At that moment, Jack and Rose are alerted by the Torchwood Hub's alert system that the TARDIS is touching down in Kirby Plaza, just above them. They both grab their guns and exit the hub to meet him. Sarah Jane, Martha, Gwen and Yanto are all still on the subwave call. Sarah Jane tells Martha to use Project Indigo to reach her in Ealing, and tells Gwen and Yanto to send them the coordinates of the hub to Mr. Smith so that they can all join them when the Doctor arrives. Martha does so, and soon she and Sarah Jane have joined the others in the hub. Outside Kirby Plaza, the Doctor exits the TARDIS and is joyfully reunited with Rose and Jack. In this timeline, the Doctor is not shot by a stray Dalek, and Jack takes them down the secret elevator down into the hub, taking the opportunity to show off to them both. Gwen and Yanto are finally introduced to the Doctor, and the Doctor is happily reunited with Martha and Sarah Jane. He tells the Torchwood team to keep the subway broadcasting, knowing that the Daleks will be able to trace it again. But not to worry, he has a plan. No sooner has he said that, does a chilling voice come through on the hub's computers. It's a voice that chills both Sarah Jane and the Doctor to the bone. Davros. He hijacks the signal from the Crucible and confronts the Doctor and his companions. He explains how he was rescued from the Time War by Dalek Khan, showing them all the insane Dalek in his shattered casing. He reveals that this new Dalek Empire was grown from mutated cells from his own body, revealing his grotesque, defleshed torso. In this timeline, the Doctor is enraged rather than disgusted. He cuts the feed and traces it back to the Crucible, getting their coordinates in the process. He then turns to his companions and the Torchwood team. They have 10 minutes before the Daleks trace the signal to Torchwood 3 and rain hellfire down on them all. He opens the floor to them. What have they got? Martha goes first, revealing that she has the Osterhagen key, a device that when used in conjunction with at least 4 other keys at various stations around the globe will detonate a network of nuclear warheads underneath the Earth's surface, destroying the planet entirely. Likewise, Sarah Jane has the Warp Star. All it needs is a little shock and it'll explode with the force of millions and tons of TNT. Jack and Rose are armed with anti-Dalekanium guns. And finally, after scouring through the Torchwood supercomputer, the sentient computer pulls up Toshiko Sato's old time lock program. Yanto shows the Doctor, claiming that it was allegedly unfinished, but the Doctor speed checks the maths and declares that it'll work brilliantly, taking a moment to marvel at the deceased Toshiko's brilliance. With their technology and weapons pooled, the Doctor and his companions are ready. The final battle is about to begin. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a like and share with your friends. You can also listen to extracts from our podcast on our TikTok and Instagram pages at Tardisian Files Podcasts. You can also join our Reddit community at Tardisian Files Podcast and put forward suggestions for future episodes. And, as always, see you next time on Tardisian Files.